The morning was cold and gray, the kind of morning that made people pull their coats a little tighter and walk a little faster. Outside the Harlow County Courthouse, a small crowd had already gathered. Some held coffee cups. Some held signs. Most just stood quietly, watching the wide stone steps with eyes full of hope and doubt. Inside, the courtroom was filling up. The wooden benches creaked as people took their seats. Reporters arranged their notebooks. Families found their spots near the back. A young woman named Denise sat in the second row, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had driven 4 hours to be here. She did not look nervous. She looked like someone who had been waiting for a very long time. The case was not a secret. For weeks, it had been the kind of story that people talked about at dinner tables and shared on their phones. Officer Dale Mercer, a 17-year veteran of the Harlow Police Department, was standing trial for misconduct and abuse of authority. The details of what he had done, how he had used his position to intimidate, to silence, to control, had come out slowly at first, and then all at once. People who had once looked the other way were no longer able to. Mercer walked in through a side door, dressed in a dark suit instead of his uniform. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and a wide jaw. His hair was neatly combed. He walked with the same stride he had always used, slow, steady, unbothered, as though the room had been arranged for his comfort and not for his trial. He glanced around the courtroom with flat, unimpressed eyes, nodded at no one in particular, and sat down beside his attorney. His attorney, a sharp-dressed man named Howard Price, leaned over and said something quietly. Mercer listened, then tilted his head just slightly, not a nod, not a shake. Just a look that said he had heard and had already decided it did not matter. At exactly 9 o'clock, the door behind the bench opened. "All rise," said the court officer. Everyone stood. Judge Renata Osei walked into the courtroom with the kind of calm that does not come from relaxation. It comes from experience. It comes from years of sitting across from every kind of person imaginable, the frightened, the arrogant, the guilty, the wrongly accused, and learning how to read all of them. She was a woman in her mid-50s with short, natural hair and glasses that sat low on her nose. She wore her black robe the way others wore armor, not for show, but because it meant something. She took her seat. She set down a single folder. She looked at the room over the rim of her glasses, slowly, from left to right, the way a teacher looks at a classroom before beginning a lesson. "You may be seated," she said. Everyone sat. The trial began. The first hour was procedural. Lawyers spoke about rules of evidence. Objections were made and ruled on. Mercer sat with his arms crossed and his chin slightly lifted, as though he were sitting through a meeting he had not wanted to attend. Once, when the prosecutor, a composed woman named Assistant District Attorney Camille Rhodes, referenced an incident from 3 years earlier, Mercer exhaled through his nose in a way that was just loud enough for the people nearest him to hear. His attorney touched his arm. Mercer did not move. Denise, in the second row, noticed. She said nothing. She just watched. The first witness took the stand after lunch. She was a woman in her 40s named Gloria, and she spoke carefully, choosing each word the way someone chooses their steps on an icy path. She described an evening 2 years ago when Officer Mercer had come to her home in response to a noise complaint and had stayed far longer than necessary. She described how he had spoken to her. How he had stood between her and her front door. How he had made her feel that if she said the wrong thing, something worse would happen. The courtroom was very quiet. Mercer, during her testimony, leaned back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he looked at his lawyer. Then he looked at Gloria on the stand, and he smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the kind of smile that says, "I remember that night differently." It was the kind of smile that has a point. Gloria stopped speaking. Her eyes moved from Mercer back to the prosecutor. She steadied herself and continued. But the smile had been seen. It had been seen by the jurors, 3 of whom shifted uncomfortably. It had been seen by the reporters. It had been seen by Denise, who felt something tighten in her chest. And it had been seen by Judge Renata Osei, who did not react, not outwardly, but who quietly set down her pen. The afternoon wore on. A second witness was called. Then a third. Each testimony added another thread to the same picture, a man who had spent years using a uniform as a reason why the rules did not apply to him. Each time one of these witnesses spoke, Mercer found small ways to make his opinion known. A slow shake of the head. A quiet exhale. A glance at the gallery that seemed to say, "Do you believe this?" Howard Price kept touching his client's arm. Mercer kept not caring. Near the end of the afternoon session, something happened that no one expected. ADA Camille Rhodes was in the middle of questioning the third witness, a soft-spoken man named Mr. Ellis, who had been a neighbor of Mercer's for several years, when Mercer leaned forward in his chair, turned toward the gallery, and said, in a voice clearly meant to be heard, "This is a waste of everyone's time." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. For a moment, no one moved. The court reporter's fingers froze above her keyboard. Mr. Ellis blinked. ADA Rhodes turned slowly from the witness stand and looked at Mercer with an expression that was perfectly controlled. Howard Price closed his eyes briefly, as though asking for patience from somewhere beyond the ceiling. And then a sound filled the room. The gavel. One strike. Clean and final, like the closing of a door. "Mr. Mercer." Judge Osei's voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The courtroom had gone so quiet that a whisper would have carried to every corner. She looked at him over her glasses with eyes that held no anger, only something far more serious than anger. Clarity. Mercer turned to face the bench. For the first time all day, something shifted in his expression. It was very small, the way a person's face changes when they walk into a room and realize, a second too late, that they have misread the situation entirely. "You will not speak unless you are spoken to," Judge Osei said. "You will not make sounds designed to communicate your feelings about these proceedings. You will not use this courtroom as a stage for your personal opinions. And you will not disrespect the people sitting in that witness chair while they are under oath." She paused. The silence was complete. "I want to be very clear with you about something, Mr. Mercer. The authority you carried in that uniform, whatever you believed it gave you, whatever doors you believed it opened, does not exist in this room. It stopped at the front door of this building. In here, the only authority that matters is the one seated at this bench. And I can assure you, without any uncertainty, that I am not impressed by men who mistake a badge for a license to do as they please." No one breathed. "You are not the first person to sit in that chair and believe that this court is something to be managed or waited out. You will not be the last. But I will tell you what I tell all of them, this courtroom is not a formality. It is not a performance. It is the place where the truth is given its proper space. And every person who sits in that witness chair, regardless of who they are, regardless of what you think of their account, deserves to give their testimony without your commentary." She let the words settle. One more outburst, Mr. Mercer, one more sigh, one more look, one more word spoken out of turn, and you will find that I have a very wide range of options available to me. I suggest you spend the remainder of this trial choosing your behavior more carefully than you have chosen it today. She looked at him for another moment, steady, unhurried, and then she turned to the witness stand. "Mr. Ellis," she said, her voice completely even, "please continue." Mr. Ellis swallowed. He nodded. He continued. Mercer did not move for a long time. He sat very straight in his chair, his jaw tight, his eyes forward. Howard Price did not touch his arm. There was nothing left to manage. In the second row, Denise let out a breath she had not realized she had been holding. The woman beside her, a stranger, reached over and briefly pressed her hand. Neither of them said anything. They did not need to. The session ended at 4:30. As the room began to empty, people moved slowly, the way people do after something important. They spoke in low voices. Some stood in small groups near the doors. A reporter tried to get a comment from Howard Price, who shook his head and kept walking. Mercer left through the side door the same way he had entered, alone, and now much quieter. The trial continued over the following 2 days. Mercer did not speak out of turn again. He sat as he was expected to sit. He looked where he was expected to look. The performance of confidence was still there, but it had changed, it was thinner now, more careful. The kind of confidence that knows it is being watched. More witnesses came. More testimony was given. Each account was different in its details but similar in its shape, a pattern of a man who had believed, for a very long time, that his position placed him above reproach. That the people he encountered did not have the same standing as he did. That the rules were flexible, depending on who you were. Ada Rhodes presented the evidence methodically and without theatrics. She did not need theatrics. The facts, laid out plainly and in order, were enough. The defense did what it could. Howard Price was skilled and thorough. He challenged timelines and questioned memories. He pointed to Mercer's service record and his years of dedication. He argued that perception was not the same as intent. Some of what he said was reasonable. But the courtroom had already seen Mercer's face during Gloria's testimony. They had already heard his voice cut through the silence of the afternoon. Those things could not be unseen or unheard. On the third day, closing arguments were made. Both sides spoke with conviction. Then the jury was sent to deliberate. They returned in less than 4 hours. The verdict was read in the same quiet, formal way that all verdicts are read, a clerk's voice, a sheet of paper, words that carried the weight of everything that had happened in that room and everything that had happened long before. Guilty. On 2 of the 3 counts. Mercer sat very still when he heard it. His face did not fall apart. But something behind his eyes changed, a door closing on something he had been holding onto for a long time. Judge Osei scheduled sentencing for 6 weeks out. She thanked the jury for their service. She reminded everyone in the gallery to exit in an orderly manner. And then, before she rose to leave, she paused for just a moment and looked out at the room, at the people who had come from far away to sit in wooden benches and wait for the truth to be taken seriously. She said nothing more. She did not need to. Outside on the courthouse steps, Denise stood in the afternoon light. It was still cold, but the sky had cleared. A few reporters gathered nearby, asking questions of people who were willing to speak. She was not one of them. She simply stood there for a moment, looking out at the street, at the ordinary world going about its ordinary business. Someone came to stand beside her. It was the woman from the second row, the stranger who had pressed her hand during the judge's words. They stood together without speaking for a while. "Did you know her?" the woman asked quietly. "Gloria, I mean. Or any of the others?" Denise shook her head. "No," she said. "But I knew someone like them." The woman nodded. She understood. They stood a little longer, and then they went their separate ways, 2 people who had witnessed the same thing and would carry it differently, in different places, for different reasons. But both of them would carry it. That is the thing about a moment of real accountability. It does not disappear when the gavel comes down or when the verdict is read or when the courtroom empties. It travels. It sits with people on their long drives home. It finds them in quiet moments weeks later. It reminds them that justice, when it arrives, does not always arrive the way they imagined, not with drama or fire or a triumphant speech. Sometimes it arrives as a single, steady voice. A pair of eyes looking over a pair of glasses. A gavel, and a pause, and a woman who knew exactly where she was and exactly what her job required of her, and who did it without flinching, without raising her voice, and without needing anyone in that room to be impressed. She was just doing her job. And that, in the end, was the most powerful thing of all.